Everybody, Jason Davis here. Welcome back to Lower League America on Compass Football. Once again, joined by the purveyor of SockTakes.com, covering lower division soccer in the United States, Nipun Chopra. Hi, Nipun.
Hi, Jason. How's it going?
It's going very well. Let's get into today's subject. Big trouble in Little Chattanooga. Quite the soccer scene happening in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We begin here. We are here because there is both an NPSL team, very successful, whose history we'll review, and a new pro soccer initiative as part of USL D3. Let's walk us up to this, Nipun. How did we get to where we are? Why are we talking Chattanooga today?
The reason we're talking about Chattanooga today, and by the way, before we start, I just want to plug Main Street Greens, Oklahoma City Energy's LGBTQ supporter group. Shout out to them. Come back to our story. Chattanooga FC and Chattanooga Pro Soccer. There are now two teams in the tiny town, 150,000 people, of Chattanooga in Tennessee. It is a story that has caught fire on social media. It is drawing conversations about what it means for U.S. soccer at large and what it means about the soccer wars. And we're going to get into all of that today.
We certainly are. We will give you a brief history of Chattanooga soccer just to get you up to speed, to bring you to this point. And it goes back to the alphabet soup era of American soccer, Nipun, when, I mean, it's alphabet soup now.
I was going to say, yeah, it's still
it was even crazier back then. And there were a couple of teams in the USISL in Chattanooga. I think the pertinent names to mention here are the Railroaders and then the Express. And the reason the Express are connected is because one of our major figures, a couple of our major figures in this story, did participate in the Express back in the day. Yeah,
that figure, the major figure being Sean McDaniel, who is now the GM of Chattanooga Pro Soccer, previously the GM of Chattanooga FC, and also previously the treasurer of the NPSL. So it's an important figure in the story, and we should recognize, Jason, that, and one of the reasons you and I wanted to do this, Jason, is we wanted to celebrate Chattanooga as well. We didn't want it to be a story about, we just talk about how things kind of went off the rails. But the truth is Chattanooga FC is Chattanooga is a success story in American soccer. And the history of soccer in Chattanooga goes back even before those USISL teams, with teams with a community of folks playing college level soccer and independent teams. And now to this point that Chattanooga FC is one of the most successful NPSL teams in the nation.
Yeah, you mentioned the college soccer scene in Chattanooga. I'm not sure a lot of people around the country outside of maybe that part of Tennessee would be aware of a soccer scene, but there is a fairly vibrant college soccer scene, including a couple of the figures who were involved in the launch of Chattanooga FC, some of the people who got together to launch that club, all attending Covenant College. So there's connections here through soccer fandom and soccer playing times during the college era for some of these figures. But let's get to Chattanooga FC. Let's talk about what this club is, launched in 2009.
It is a club that's been a model of success for NPSL teams. Along with Detroit City FC, it's the most celebrated NPSL club. As you point out, Jason, they've been in existence for 10 years. What's remarkable about them is that they've managed to have success both on the field as well as off the pitch, and as well as in the vibrant world of social media with their very active Chattahooligans supporter group who have one of the best social media accounts in all of American soccer Twitter.
And a fine-looking badge. I mean, I just want to throw that in there. Yeah. I've always dug the way that Chattanooga FC looks and has been branded. And when we talk about NPSL, again, sometimes we talk about clubs that are more interested in just getting college kids on the field and getting them some playing time. Chattanooga FC, kind of a hybrid. They've got college kids. They're certainly doing that, but they're also trying to market a team, and it's paid dividends. 2009, CFC founded. They joined the Southeast Division of the NPSL. 2010, just a year later, they averaged 4,400 fans a game, which is pretty incredible for an amateur team in this country. 2015, they reached the final, their fourth final, as a matter of fact, in the NPSL, which is pretty astounding because this is about on-field and off. And in that final against Cosmos B, a game they lost, 18,227 people showed up. I believe that is still the record for an amateur game in the United States, Nipun.
Absolutely. Finley Stadium is where they played. A stadium we'll talk about, capacity 20,000. Incredible to think that over 18,000 people showed up to an NPSL game. I know of personal friends who drove from Indianapolis for it. So it was a huge event and remains a landmark in NPSL history.
It certainly does. 2016, just to bring us through on the timeline a little bit more, Sean McDaniel, the aforementioned Sean McDaniel, again, one of the originators involved in the very beginning, named general manager, so sort of stepping up into a major leadership role with Chattanooga FC. And this is where things start to get a little weird, Nipun, because NPSL, NASL, UPS, getting all of my, butchering the alphabet soup, that's what I just did. USL, all trying to vie for their little scrap of territory here in Chattanooga because of the success of this team, obviously kind of rose up. So what begins to happen with Chattanooga FC starting around 2017?
Yes, this is where we're going to slow down a little bit in our story, Jason. What started happening in 2017, and really a little bit before that, are these board members who have been involved with this team for 7 to 8 years by this point, start talking about what's the future? Are we going to go pro? Are we going to stay independent? What are we going to do? And their first flirtation with going pro happens with the NASL. I've talked to NASL people, and they had some reservations. So did Chattanooga FC, and that never materialized, although they were in discussions to be one of the teams that maybe would come into NASL had the NASL survived. We also know about the fact that they signed a letter of intent, letter of commitment to join NISA, which is the league that was the brainchild of Mr. Peter Wilt. They signed this in fall of 2017. In spring of 2018, Jason, they had backed away from that commitment. And as we found out, of course, NISA, things fell apart for NISA. Long story short, they're back in business. They just applied for sanctioning, so things kind of went different ways for both these entities. But what we have so far is, and Chattanooga FC has said no to NASL, has walked away from NISA, and as things stand around March, April, May of 2018, they are thinking in terms of staying independent.
Now, around this time, again, backing away from NISA, around the same time, Chattanooga FC kind of becomes a focal point for discussions about independent soccer clubs in the United States. They hold a summit for American soccer, which draws some, I would say, thought leaders maybe in this area is a good way to describe them, Nipun, people who are thinking about how do we get an open pyramid, how do we launch clubs, allow clubs to be sort of self-financed, maybe even outside of the U.S. soccer pyramid, considering the restrictions there, which we've already talked about. On lower league America. So that brings us up to sort of the contentious area, right, and to Chattanooga Pro Soccer. And before we get there, though, let's sort of dive in here to what happened in the last couple of months with Chattanooga FC, and then we'll step aside, come back, and sort of launch into what Chattanooga Pro Soccer is doing.
Absolutely. So, in terms of Chattanooga FC, as you said, they had that summit. They were thinking also, there were conversations happening with Division Zero, which was something that was being led by Jacksonville Armada owner Robert Palmer. There were conversations about NPSL Pro, which we'll get to later. So Chattanooga FC was really in a state of uncertainty. Their lease in 2018 was about to expire with Finley Stadium. So the conversations were happening internally about what the future is. And one of those conversations was, and this is a pivotal conversation, a pivotal point in this story, is the Chattanooga board had intimated to Mr. Sean McDaniel that he would likely not be rehired as GM in 2019. So Mr. McDaniel, for his own words, suggested to me when we spoke to him for the story that at that time he started thinking about other possibilities. We'll talk about some of those other possibilities.
Right. So let's get into this. Now we'll set the stage here. Let's step aside. When we come back, we'll talk about Chattanooga Pro Soccer coming into the scene as part of the USL D3 initiative and some of the concerns. Back here on Lower League America, still talking Chattanooga soccer scene. We've got Chattanooga FC. We've talked a little bit about the history and brought them up to the present day, but this is where things get very testy. A July that brought a lot of happenings. Nipun Chopra with me, and of course, Nipun, the key figure is Sean McDaniel, but it's also about Bob Martino and USL eyeballing Chattanooga, maybe because of what Chattanooga FC had laid in that town.
Yeah, so this is where the story gets contentious because what we hear from the Chattanooga side, and we spoke to Mr. Tim Kelly, chairman of Chattanooga FC, what we hear from him is a slightly different version of events than we hear from Mr. Sean McDaniel. What happens is, according to Mr. Sean McDaniel, once he hears about the fact that he's not going to be rehired, he soon hears from, on July 24th, according to him, the first time from Bob Martino, who has bought the franchise rights for a team in Chattanooga from USL D3. The franchise rights are important because it allows an owner to own basically a plot of land, so to speak, in a particular city, preventing other owners from buying that, putting a team in the same area, in the same league.
Yes, in the same league. I think it's important, Nipun, just to make sure that we're not talking about, this doesn't bar anybody from another league from coming into Chattanooga, exactly, but specifically USL D3. And I imagine, considering the crossover, no USL owner is going to be able to buy franchise rights to Chattanooga and go over the top of Bob Martino.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Jason, we're not sure because all of us assumed that the USL D3 model would follow the same franchise disclosure document as the USL D2 model, which the D2 model I have read extensively and reported on extensively. What we learned from the D2 model, Jason, is one of the things we learned was that a team playing at a specific stadium in a USL D2 team, a USL D2 league, cannot have another team from a rival league playing in that same stadium. So to be more specific here, it was my belief and the belief of people who read these documents, the D2 documents, that not both teams, vis-a-vis Chattanooga FC and Chattanooga Pro Soccer, could not play at Finley Stadium. As it turns out, that is not accurate. So the USL D3 model, which we don't know what it is, we don't have access to their documents yet, is different from the D2 model. And this is one of the ways that it's different because it facilitates the possibility of both teams playing at Finley Stadium.
So Sean McDaniel says that Bob Martino contacted him for the first time on July 24th. That's obviously important because it's just a couple of days later that Sean McDaniel resigns from the Chattanooga FC board, and only about 2 weeks later, roughly that McDaniel is named the general manager of Chattanooga Pro Soccer. So all of this, again, the timeline is very compressed, and it's leading to some speculation about the way things went down. Needless to say, what we've got now is Chattanooga FC, who has no intention of going anywhere, in the NPSL, maybe considering other options, which we can talk about, and now Chattanooga Pro Soccer, without a name and a brand, it should be mentioned. We don't quite know what they're going to be called yet, with plans to launch in USL D3 in 2019.
Yeah, and one of the things we have to mention here is from Sean McDaniel's, when I pushed back on Sean McDaniel saying, isn't it strange that you went from having a conversation with this Bob Martino gentleman one day and 3 days later, 2 days later resigning from the NPSL board, 3 days later resigning from CFC and being announced as GM of this other team? Doesn't that sound strange? He basically suggested to me that while he'd had conversations with USL in terms of personal things, his first conversation about Chattanooga soccer with Bob Martino was July 24th. And Bob Martino has come out and said on some interview that he approached the CFC board about possibly collaborating with them or buying them out, is what he suggested. However, Tim Kelly tells us that he had never heard from Bob Martino until after that pivotal July 27th date when McDaniel resigned and the story broke. So these compressed dates, as you point out, Jason, are critical to the story and critical to some of the pushback and the controversy we've seen.
So this leads us to, I mean, again, there's nothing that prevents USL D3 or USL from putting a team in Chattanooga with ownership in the form of Bob Martino, who bought the franchise rights, especially if it is provided for that they can share Finley Stadium with Chattanooga FC. And obviously, Chattanooga FC has no intention at the moment of going anywhere, but that leads us to a question, Nipun, of whether or not these two teams can actually coexist and whether splitting a market that honestly isn't very big is going to be a problem.
That's the magic question now, for the future. What does it mean for these two teams? And I posed that same question you just posed to me, Jason. I posed that to Tim Kelly and to Sean McDaniel. and they had different answers for me. Tim Kelly was skeptical of the idea that both teams can coexist in Chattanooga. He said to me, it's going to be either the team that already has grassroots, aka CFC, or it's going to be the team that has deeper pockets, which is going to be the Bob Martino-led Chattanooga Pro Soccer team. On the other hand, when I posed this question to Sean McDaniel, he suggested to me that the whole idea of this operation is going to be to collaborate, to work together, which is something we've not seen between USL and the independent side of the pyramid, so to speak. So we're getting two very different answers, and I'll say this. I posed to Mr. Sean McDaniel that what if 2 years from now, we have a situation where Chattanooga FC has gone out of business, even partially because of Chattanooga Pro Soccer. And he said to me that I wasn't giving the city of Chattanooga enough credit, that they both could easily survive. But Jason, and I want to hear your opinion on this. In my opinion, a market like Chattanooga, which is kind of, it's a good market, but it's not a fantastic, incredible soccer market. 150,000 people. These two teams will compete for the same revenue, same sponsorship, same players, literally in the same stadium. I cannot see both these teams surviving. What do you think?
Like Sean McDaniel, I want to be careful about not, like you said, I want to be careful about not giving Chattanooga enough credit. It certainly doesn't seem possible to me. Certainly not at the level that Chattanooga FC has already established in terms of their not expected attendance. I mean, I'm sure that if attendance came down a little bit, it wouldn't be the sky is falling for an NPSL amateur club with college players who's playing a short season. Although, again, we need to be careful about pigeonholing CFC because they may want to build something bigger to try to compete a little bit more. What I'll say is what troubles me about this situation, Nipun, is the same thing that troubles me in every situation where there's an existing team and another team comes in with big plans or a professional setup or a lot of money, deep pockets. It seems as though Bob Martino and Chattanooga Pro Soccer are targeting Chattanooga specifically because of what Chattanooga FC has proven about that market. And that is not fundamentally a good thing for American soccer, building out an entire map of teams. It may be the way our system works. It may be the way our capitalistic system works economically, but it doesn't seem right from a soccer perspective.
I agree with you. And I spoke to, no one from the NPSL league spoke to us for this story, but I spoke to some people in USL on background. And they told me that they firmly believe in this Chattanooga market and that they're not there to destroy CFC. And one of the things they say is you have to notice that this market of Chattanooga is between Knoxville and Atlanta and Nashville and Birmingham. It's almost equidistant from those four markets. 3 of those 4 markets have currently existing USL or USL D3 teams. So that's their way of thinking about this. But honestly, I'm skeptical of that claim too. Being around American soccer as much as you have, and you've been around it more than I have, but even as much as I have, I find it difficult to believe that that a league that went to 40 markets and made a huge show and tell about each one of those 40 markets it went to ended up in this particular market where it didn't really visit, as far as I remember, and wanted to compete against one of the most successful, established grassroots soccer teams in the nation. We have something that's off.
We have a tension point, Nipun, between what might be smart from a business perspective. Hey, look, somebody has proven the efficacy of that market in Chattanooga with Chattanooga FC. And again, sort of what is better for the game writ large. And you can't tell me that there aren't plenty of other appropriately sized markets for a USL D3 team, especially when you're talking about starting with 8 or 10 or 12 teams in the early going for USL D3. It just doesn't make sense that you have to go to Chattanooga.
I agree. And maybe, having said that, Jason, I think where we should end this conversation with is the idea that this is a microcosm for the future of American soccer. Chattanooga, the next couple of years, will be a microcosm for the future of American soccer. Because if what Mr. Tim Kelly said is right, which is only one team can survive, and which is truly what I believe too, it's going to continue to show that these two sides are going to continue to war. The independent model versus the franchise model are going to continue to war until one is completely extinguished. On the other hand, if Sean McDaniel is right, and there's truly going to be collaboration between these two sides, it'll be the start of something incredible, I believe. And if Sean McDaniel is right, who knows? Maybe they will survive if there is collaboration.
So we're currently waiting on Chattanooga Pro Soccer to sort of announce their intentions. Obviously, we talked about sharing Finley Stadium. That seems to be the way things are going. On the Chattanooga FC front, Nipun, just to wrap this up, is there a bigger plan? Are they looking perhaps to go into the NPSL Pro model if that does come to fruition?
Great question. Yes, that's their play now. A bunch of NPSL owners met about 2 weeks ago in New York City to talk about NPSL Pro. What I was told on background is that those conversations went really well. They have about 10 teams ready to commit, and then once that ball starts rolling, they'll have a bunch of other teams. The teams that are involved are the likes of some ex-NASL teams like Cosmos in Miami and Jacksonville, Chattanooga, Detroit City, two very important NPSL teams, Virginia Beach FC, etc. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do because, as we talked about last week, Jason, they're going to be an unsanctioned league, which causes, so I should say that again, they're going to not be sanctioned by USSF. They'll be sanctioned by USASA, which is an amateur association. And that will pose some newer problems that we're basically going to be uncharted territory. But yes, the play for Chattanooga FC is to go pro and play a full season.
We'll see how this all turns out. A tale of two Chattanoogas. Big trouble in little Chattanooga. Nipun Chopra, make sure you're visiting Sock Takes and following everything covering lower division soccer in the United States over there. Make sure you're liking and following Compass Football across most of your social media platforms. And make sure you subscribe to Lower League America. We'll talk to you soon. Good night.